when you approach this with an all or nothing mindset, you are going to fail. I was having a conversation with a client. He's really been struggling. And the only way that he believes that he can lose weight is by doing something very aggressive. He calls it crash dieting and essentially dropping his calories below 1,000 calories so that he can lose some short-term weight. Then he starts to feel better about himself, only to end up regaining the weight, falling back into his old behaviors of overeating, overdrinking, binging on the weekends. Listen, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I've been there. It's not about the food, but it is about the mindset, because food, from a molecular scientific standpoint, is not inherently good or bad. It's just a set of molecular structures that are broken down in the body into its individual component. You are not a good or bad person for the foods that you eat. You are not a good or bad person for wanting to eat foods that are generally accepted as healthy or unhealthy. You're an adult, you're in control. Well, then it is my responsibility to figure out how to eat the foods that I want to eat within reason, while still being able to effectively control my calorie intake. And that is the name of the game, my friends. That is where we actually do learn to live in the gray. Welcome back to another episode of the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show. I'm your host, as always, Ben Brown, owner and head coach here at Body System. And today we're tackling the biggest progress killer that I see in high-performing men and women, and it's called dichotomous thinking. You know it. Good versus bad foods, clean versus dirty, perfect or failed. That black and white mindset fuels restriction, rebound, and the never-ending yo-yo dieting process. And so in this solo episode, I'm going to break down why trying harder is certainly not the answer, why unconditional permission is, and how to use our PrimeFit OS decision-making process around establishing awareness, rooting into alignment, taking action, and learning how to audit to build autonomy, flexibility, and ultimately consistency in the real world, because that's what actual change is all about. By the end of this conversation, you're going to know exactly how to eat like an adult, hopefully, live in the gray, and stop relying on willpower to get results. Okay, what's up, my friends? Now, today, we're talking about stinking thinking. We are talking about dichotomous thinking. We are talking about black or white thinking. We're talking about the all or nothing mindset. Talking about good and bad foods and clean, quote unquote, clean and dirty foods. And we are potentially talking about the biggest obstacle that I believe most people experience and have to navigate, or perhaps the biggest limiting factor that keeps people stuck in the perpetual yo-yo dieting cycles in existence. And like I said, that is that of the dichotomous mindset. It is that of all or nothing, good versus bad, right or wrong, clean foods, dirty foods, good, bad foods, blah, blah, blah. So let's talk through this a little bit, because I was having a conversation with a client just yesterday. And in our conversation, he's really been struggling with, essentially for the entirety of his life, he's been yo-yo dieting and kind of bouncing around from one overly restrictive diet to the next. And the only way that he believes that he can lose weight is by doing something very aggressive. He calls it crash dieting, and essentially dropping his calories below 1,000 calories so that he can lose some short-term weight. Then he starts to feel better about himself. And usually it happens before a trip or before an event or, something like that, only to end up, of course, regaining the weight, falling back into his old behaviors of overeating, overdrinking, binging on the weekends, not maintaining that semblance of structure and consistency and all of the things that we teach in our coaching programs. And so a lot of our conversations have lent itself around sort of this all or nothing mindset of like, hey, man, how do we really help you acknowledge that you need to learn that the biggest challenge for you, it's not that one, it's not that there's anything wrong with your metabolism. It's not that, you're broken. It's not that there's anything wrong with you per se. You're doing what so many people do or believe that they need to do in order to lose weight. But instead, what we need to do is we need to learn how to live in the gray a little bit instead of stop bouncing back and forth between white knuckling it and going super hard and then just kind of goofing around and doing what you want and absolving yourself of any of the responsibility around what you consume. And that's the biggest problem that I believe we experience in this dieting culture, in the nutrition world that we're living in, is because everything that's in front of us lends itself to this overly restrictive mindset, right? When you scroll your social media feed, what do we see? We see, well, you need to cut out carbs. You need to, go carnivore. You need to go keto. You need to go Whole30. You need to do 75 hard. You need to train in these overly aggressive ways. You need to do high rocks. You need to do CrossFit. You need to train 4 days a week, not 2 days a week. Oh, you need to do fasted cardio. Don't eat after 6 p.m., blah, 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 ad nauseum, all of this stuff. And it puts us in positions where we can't help but think that ultimately it has to be more complex than it really is. And I'm telling you, listen, I've been doing this for 20 years now. And I've been there. By the way. Part of my journey is like, listen, I restricted everything after, I used to deal with tons of gut issues, ultimately figured out what was going on. I had this nasty bacterial infection from which I used a number of different supplements to start to heal my gut. But in conjunction with doing that, and again, this was 20-ish years ago, I had to remove all of the offensive foods, gluten, dairy, sugar, for an extended period of time. And I got better and I felt so much better. But it also threw me into this loop of what really was like this orthorexia of like fear of food, body image distortion issues, and ultimately is like just going through this cycle of like I would eat clean all week long and then I would just completely go off the rails on the weekend. And it was like this Jekyll and Hyde type situation where I'd coach clients all week. I'd have, the facade on of being a healthy trainer. And then come like Friday afternoon, driving home from training clients, we used to live like right behind Whole Foods in North Scottsdale. I'd roll up to Whole Foods and I'd get like a gluten-free pizza. I'd get a couple bottles of wine or maybe like a 6-pack of good beer and all of these snacks. And I would just eat like an asshole all weekend long. And so I get it, is my point. I understand. And I had to go through that. And I had to coach clients through that as well, of me trying to have them do the things that I was doing, removing gluten, dairy, sugar, all of these things, eating quote unquote clean, only to realize not only was it not realistic for me, but it certainly was not realistic for them. So we've had to just modify and change. And now being a husband, a father, a business owner, like my kids are 15, 14, and 10. And I mean, you've got to pivot, you've got to adjust, and you have to have more flexibility and malleability in this process. And so what I'm saying is that when you approach this with an all or nothing mindset, you are going to fail. Plain and simple, unless you're a 24-year-old, single, highly motivated individual with very few responsibilities, then sure, maybe you can ride that eat clean train for a certain period of time. But once real life starts to kick in, good luck with that. And so what I'm here to share is that it doesn't have to be like that. And we have a system and we have a strategy for working through this. And I'm going to share that with you here. So, like I said, it's like when we're scrolling through and we're seeing all of these things, the reason why we keep bouncing back and forth from one, I'm going to call it diet, call it whatever you want. I feel like diet's not a great word because a lot of guys like me, we don't resonate with the sort of diet culture per se, but we do these things. We put ourselves in these situations. Say, oh, I'm just going to restrict alcohol for 30 days, or I'm just going to eat clean for this period of time, or I'm just going to track my macros, for this period of time. So you call it whatever you want, right? Regardless whether it's dieting, it is adjusting your nutrition in generally an overly restrictive way. But what happens is we believe that we need to do something. So we say, okay, I'm going to start. I overly restrict. invariably you end up craving something. There comes a tipping point, whether it's a stressful day at work, we're overly emotional, we're on a work trip, we're out with the boys, we're socializing, and there comes an effort moment. You end up overeating, usually on the things that you've been restricting. That's followed by guilt, shame, regret. And at some point, whether it's right away or further down the road, you end up going back into the restrictive mindset and say, you know what? I'll start again. I'll try it again, or I'll do something completely different, but also involve some form of restriction. I was talking about my client who does these quote unquote crash diets. He's done these, he's done HCG, he's done all of these essentially the same thing. And he feels like it's the only way he can lose weight. But the reality is, what I'm helping him realize is like, no, dude, just because you went from 3,000 calories a day to 1,000 calories a day doesn't mean you have to be at 1,000 calories. If we could just find a way to consistently be at 2,000 calories, you would consistently lose weight. And yet you're not doing that because you lack the skills and the tools and the behaviors to plan and prepare accordingly so that you can be consistent. And so the more that we do this restrict cycle, the more it fuels this yo-yo dieting. And so the mindset shift that we need to take into this is simply that, well, if we can agree, right? If we can agree that you've been through that restrictive cycle, right? Restrict, crave, overeat, or binge, if you will, or quote unquote, fall off the wagon and then go back into the restrictive dieting cycle, right? It's this perpetual cycle. If we can agree that what all that really does is all of the black or white thinking, I'll just cut out carbs, I'll just eat clean, I'll just stop, I'll just intermittent fast, I'll just only eat carnivore, whatever it is, right? All that's doing really is helping us manage our calories. And I'm telling you, I'm justifying this. I'm telling you legitimately, this is based on research. This is what we know. It's creating ways for us to manage our calorie intake. And so if we can agree that that's what it's doing, then we can also agree it's not about the food, but really what it is about the mindset, because food from a molecular, from a scientific, from a physics standpoint is not inherently good or bad. It's just a set of molecular structures that are broken down in the body into its individual components, whether that be simple sugars, whether that be, so monosaccharides or polysaccharides, or essential amino acids, which are proteins, or fatty acids, which are fats. They're all just broken down into different forms of those. And so we can also know and agree that calories reign supreme. So if we can find ways for you to effectively control for your calories consistently and create a calorie deficit, then you will lose weight. You will lose weight. And so, assuming we're all in agreement over that, then it begs sort of us determining, if we can agree that calories reign supreme, then ultimately what all of this comes down to is having unconditional permission and taking ownership and taking responsibility and having the level of empowerment and autonomy to actually learn how to eat like an adult and accept that we should never, ever have or need to be relegated to a subset list of acceptable green checkmark foods and unacceptable red checkmark foods. And instead of that, actually acknowledge the consequences of the behaviors that we're infusing. Because if we have unconditional permission, we say, listen, if we can agree that calories reign supreme, then it is simply up to me as an adult who has full autonomy to learn how to control my calories. And I can do that by eating totally quote unquote clean, right? By restricting certain food groups, by intermittent fasting. Sure, that works to some degree. But if I also realize that that doesn't work for me, well, then it is my responsibility to figure out how to eat the foods that I want to eat within reason while still being able to effectively control my calorie intake. And that is the name of the game, my friends. That is where the rubber meets the road. That is where we actually do learn to live in the gray and accept that you are not a good or bad person for the foods that you eat. You are not a good or bad person for wanting to eat foods that are generally accepted as healthy or unhealthy, right? It doesn't make you a bad person to want to drink alcohol, to want to eat Oreo cookies, or for even doing those both at the same time. You are simply a human who is wired to root out sugar and fat because they are the most valuable resources for our survival. That is literally how we are wired. And so, again, we can agree that you are just doing human behaviors. But as a human who has full autonomy and is in control of their life, just like you're in control of your budget and your spending and your savings, whether you like what you see in your bank account or not, we can still agree you were in control, right? And so, how do we build the tools to ensure that we are building the level of ownership that is required to be able to make the changes that we want to make? And this is where we practice as a coaching business. We teach skills and infuse fundamental tools that help give you that level of ownership, that help teach you how to take ownership through tracking methodology, through planning structure, systems, and processes, through being able to actually look at data and make informed decisions, right? And that's what I want you guys to realize and to understand, hopefully through this conversation, is because if you're listening to this and you're nodding your head of like, yeah, I'm totally the type of person who just kind of bounces from one overly restrictive thing to the next. And it really just ends up being this sort of test of willpower and self-control and discipline, which works for a while. And then it doesn't work because why? Because life, because stress, because travel, because the kids, because spring break, because summer break and travel, because the holidays, because the death in the family, because, right? Because of life. And that's why we need to learn how to navigate the stressful times so that we can be consistent in the stressful times as well as in the quote unquote easy times. So that you don't ever have to say to yourself, I'll start again when things feel easier, because they don't get easier. They don't. It's always something. At least if you're anything like me, again, I have kids, a family, a business. Like, you're probably not in a dissimilar situation. We all are quote unquote busy and we all have a lot of perceived responsibilities. So that's where we have to learn to accept unconditional permission of like, if I'm going to eat the pizza, do I have to eat the whole pizza? Or could I simply have a piece or two, enjoy it, coupled with maybe a chicken breast or a salad? Do I have to drink all the beers? Or could I just have a beer? Or could I just have a non alcoholic beer? Or could I simply say, I'm not drinking tonight, thank you. I will have a sparkling water. You're an adult, you're in control. And so those are the key kind of concepts and considerations around this dichotomous thinking mindset, right? Because we know very clearly that the people that practice this black or white thinking are the ones that are perpetually stuck. And they're the ones that are most likely to lose the weight and then gain the weight back and then some. And so, for a lot of the hard charging men and women that we work with, the tools that we infuse don't necessarily revolve as much around eat this, not that. They revolve around the practices and the principles and the systems. We call it our personal operating systems. That's why our program, Prime Fit OS operating system, right? We help you build the operating systems to navigate the real world. You're on a business trip. How are we structuring our day, our routine from morning till night? When am I going to train? How am I going to get my steps? What are the challenges that I'm going to experience and the potential obstacles? What do the relationships look like? Where are we going out for lunch? Where are we going out for dinner? What am I going to order? This is the game plan. Any team that's going to be successful is going to have a game plan. They're going to do film review. We do film review, right? We reflect on previous weeks and previous circumstance behaviors to identify your existing behaviors. And then we work to change those behaviors through conversations, through strategies, through dedicated structure, and through planning ahead. Those are the tools and skills that we want you to be able to have. And there's a dedicated process to be able to do that. And so Once you're equipped with those, then you can go on the business trip and you can be comfortable. And don't get me wrong, it takes some work. It takes some practice, just like anything else that you develop skills around. It takes some practice to be able to say, I'm not drinking tonight, or I'll just have one, or you know what, I'm sticking with non-alcoholic beverages for the time being, or I'm committed to losing 20 pounds in the next 3 months. And so I'm going to refrain from alcohol tonight because I'm getting up early to hit the gym. I'd love for you to join me if you want. And you'd be surprised at how many of your coworkers would actually be willing to join you. And we're also looking for an opportunity to not feel obliged to drink. But that's a conversation for another time. Here, it's about having the systems and the tools and the structure and the strategies and the thought process to know how to navigate the roadblocks. We've got baseball tournament all weekend long. Cool. What's the plan? What are you bringing? Are you bringing in a cooler? Do you want to have a hot dog there? How are we fitting that in the plan? What are the dads doing when you guys go out after the game or in the break? Right? Is someone bringing beers? Are you going to, take part? Like, what does all of that look like? You have to be equipped with the ability to navigate those versus simply saying, oh, that's on the plan, that's off the plan. It's not going to work, man. It's just not going to work for you. And so it's the ability to know how to make decisions in those moments. That's the most valuable tool that we can provide for you. And that as an adult who has autonomy over their behaviors and decisions and accepts full ownership and responsibility over the outcomes of their actions, those are the tools and skills that you need to develop rather than simply telling yourself, I just need to be good this week. I just need to eat clean. I just need to follow the plan, blah, blah, blah. We've all been there before. So if you're someone who's resonating with this conversation and you're finding yourself in circumstances and situations where you're having a hard time being consistent, then what I'll challenge you with here is to start to adopt the unconditional permission thought process. What would it look like for you to include the things that you deem off limits? The pizza, the burgers, the beer, the wings, the chocolate, the cake, the cookies, whatever it is, but not in a way that you normally would, right? Just a slice of pizza, just a burger without the bun, a light beer versus an IPA, maybe a cocktail on the weekend versus one every day when you get home from work. It's learning to live in the gray here so that we can enjoy the things that we want without ever having to feel like they're off limits. And hey, don't get me wrong. Like if you're hard charging towards 10% body fat, like you're going to be abstaining from alcohol. You're probably going to be abstaining from sweets and pizza and burgers, like there's trade-offs to all of this. But if you're just someone who's trying to drop 10, 20, 30 pounds to get to a reasonable body fat, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to include these things in reasonable amounts while being able to actually eat like an adult and not eat like an asshole, is ultimately what I'm trying to say. And what I think you're more than capable of doing. Now, if that's something that you want help with, by all means, this is what we do and what we do best. And obviously, you can tell I'm passionate about this, but I've seen time and again how much of a difference shifting this mindset and us helping you build these skills and tools can make in the scope of your life, how you show up, the level of confidence and self-belief that you have, the example that you're setting for your family, the way that you walk into the office, the way your coworkers are attracted to you and what you represent, the way it permeates over into their behaviors, the level of business that you're able to create and produce because of the energy that is present within you, because you have full control and clarity and conviction around what you're doing. And you don't have to worry about the ridiculous dieting mindset, dichotomous, black or white, all or nothing thinking anymore. So if that's something that you guys want help with, by all means, grab a link on my schedule down in the show notes below. I'd be happy to have a conversation. And full disclosure here, we are very selective about the type of people, men and women, that we bring into our coaching program. And so this is not a sales call. This is simply an opportunity for us to get to know each other, for me to find out more about where you are, where you want to go, what are the obstacles that are getting in the way, for me then to take that information and determine if we have the tools to be able to support you. Assuming we do, then we can talk about what the process might look like, assuming, again, we feel like you're the right fit for the program, and assuming you feel like we're the right fit for you. And so if you're on the fence, if you've been considering scheduling a chance to talk, I just want you to know that that's the process. I'd love to have the opportunity personally to speak with you. I hope that's been helpful for you, and I'll look forward to the opportunity to chat further. Hope you guys have a wonderful day, and thank you for taking the time to tune in.